Some time ago I went over some of the arcade conversions that were available on the Turbografx 16 and PC Engine. Among that first group we found a lot to like and all the proof you needed that the 8-bit CPU that platform had rarely held it back in any meaningful way. Those games looked and played great, and it inspired me to do a follow-up video that covers 10 more arcade conversions to the Turbo and how they fared. Many of these games were absolute classics in their coin-op form, and we will see if the Turbo versions were able to do them justice in a number of different areas. This one should be fun, so let's get started. I always smile whenever I fire up Street Fighter II Champion Edition for the PC Engine. The arcade version of this had been an upgrade to the original with a few gameplay tweaks and the boss characters now playable. The 1993 PC Engine Edition retains a remarkable amount of content in its 20 megabits of ROM, the largest hue card released for the platform. It has the bonus stages, the voice clips, the characters, the backgrounds, and the endings. The only thing it lacked was a turbo mode that would appear in later versions for the Super Nintendo and Genesis. As far as visuals, like the other 16-bit home releases, you get smaller details and a cut-in animation, but it still looks and plays great. These things are of course most notable when compared directly to the arcade, but they hold up much better when shown against its contemporaries. As far as the music, this does take some liberties with the original's overall feel. But again, the approximation still sounds good, and I can't fault it in any meaningful way. Unfortunately, this game never left Japan for the PC Engine, so it rarely gets talked about with the same reverence as the other home conversions. The fact this game looks this good on a console with an 8-bit CPU from 1987 is nothing short of spectacular. It really shows just how ahead the PC Engine was for its time. It always made me wonder how Super Street Fighter II would have looked on it, but that one never happened.
Round 1, fight! Hadouken! SLX Logo! Hadouken! SLX Logo! Hadouken! Round 1, fight! Hadouken!
The PC Engine also got a version of the Taito arcade classic Liquid Kids in 1992. This action platformer sees a young hippopotamus battle to save his land from an evil fire demon. The arcade edition was crazy colorful, well animated, and had loads of stuff happening on the screen. Surely the lowly PC Engine conversion could never duplicate all that, right? Not so fast. While this effort does simplify some of the backgrounds and animations, it is still quite faithful in overall look and appeal. The sprites are still a decent size, there are still numerous enemies to contend with, and the music sounds pretty damn good as well. The only real eyesore here is the sprite flicker that pops up when you get a lot happening in the same area on the screen. But even that is brief and only shows up here and there. Much like Street Fighter II Champion Edition, this stayed in Japan and never made its way out in North America, which was a real shame, considering there isn't much like it on the platform. A virtually arcade-perfect port would land on the Saturn some years later, that completely trumped it, but as far as the 4th generation goes, this was as good as we could have hoped. Many of Sega's classic arcade games were still showing up on other platforms during the 16-bit generation. The PC Engine got its own conversion of Shinobi in 1989, a 3 megabit hue card that gave us some mixed results. Graphically, this version was among the most accurate home releases of its day. It blows away the previous 8-bit editions in color, sprite size, and detail. The sound effects and music were also well done and a great representation of the original. If those were my only critiques, this game would be a classic and one of the platform's best action arcade conversions. Unfortunately, things take a hit when it comes to content, and there are some massive omissions. First, Shinobi can no longer melee attack, and can no longer upgrade his throwing stars to the gun, which fundamentally changes the way it plays. To make matters worse, we also lose the second stage and its boss encounter, plus the ever-popular bonus rounds. These things were not easy to overlook and left us with a version that looked and sounded the part, but was lacking the gameplay and longevity of its namesake. I still recommend you try this version because it can still be a good time, but there is no question that the publisher Asmic cut one too many corners in making it happen. I'm on record as a stern hater of the arcade game Rastan Saga II. I felt this failed to live up to the original in every single way. It does have its fans, however, and in 1990, Taito delivered a conversion of it to the PC Engine. I have to admit, as far as the visuals, they definitely captured the underwhelming arcade graphics perfectly. The sprites are large, just as poorly animated, and the backgrounds lack the same level of detail. One area the PC Engine edition goes a step further in is the music department. Holy mess is this soundtrack tinny and ear-piercing. I had to cut it back to capture the footage you are seeing here. Overall, for those of you that appreciate this garbage, the PC Engine does do a fairly good job in most areas, including the gameplay. For those of you like me that hated this dumpster fire, keep on trucking. The PC Engine did far too good of a job replicating this mess, and there is absolutely nothing to see here. Dynasty Wars is our first Super CD-ROM arcade conversion in this episode, a 1994 release of the Capcom hack-and-slash classic. In the arcade original, you would make your way across a side-scrolling battlefield on horseback, felling enemy troops along the way. The original arcade ran on the CPS hardware, a 1989 release that looked and played well for its time. The home version here loses some detail and gains some sprite flicker, but otherwise this is a faithful adaptation visually. I admit that sometimes that flicker can be obtrusive, but I don't feel it ever kills the gameplay. That gameplay is what retains most of the fun of the original. Not too many games allow you to beat down an entire rebellion on horseback, much less across 8 stages. Thanks to the CD-ROM format, the music is pleasant, there's a ton of cinematics, and there's a fair bit of voice work. The only real area I can complain about outside of that sprite flicker is the lack of a 2-player mode. The PC Engine Super CD conversion strips away the co-op multiplayer, which was one of the arcade's best features. Like many PC Engine games, this remained exclusively in Japan. Gradius was a 1985 arcade release from Konami. As a horizontal shoot 'em up, you knew this had to be made for the PC Engine, and in 1991, we got a 2 megabit hue card that was outstanding in its accuracy. Konami did the home conversion themselves, and it resulted in not just a game that looked, sounded, and played well, but even has an extra stage, just like the MSX edition. That's 8 stages of the Vic Viper slaying the evil Bacterian Empire. Like the arcade, there are only 2 things to collect in the playfield: the red and blue power capsules. The red variety moves the power meter 1 space, allowing you to choose your own speed, the type of weapon system you employ, your options, and your shields. The blue power capsule obliterates all enemies on the screen. Some resolution differences mean there is a bit of vertical scrolling to the stages, but otherwise this beauty is spot on. I never really understood why Konami left this in Japan and didn't bring it over to the Turbo at some point. The system already had a reputation with shoot 'em up fans, and the Genesis was just getting started with the genre themselves. Finally, it does have a 2-player mode, but you must take turns, unlike the arcade original. The arcade version of Heavy Unit was a Kaneko and Taito joint released in 1988. It's another horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up, this time featuring a transforming ship with varying weapon options. I always liked Heavy Unit in the arcade, and the PC Engine edition is decent. We do see a lot of simplification in the background detail, the sprites are smaller, there's less of them, and the music doesn't quite hit as hard. But as far as the stage layout, enemies, weapons, and bosses, the content here gets the job done. It really is something when you consider how small some of these hue card conversions were, this one coming in at a mere 3 megabits. It kinda got overshadowed by the Mega Drive release, which had more detail, bigger sprites, and additional content. Make no mistake, however, this game's content is still hard as sin and will crush all but the most ardent shoot 'em up fan. As you may have suspected, this PC Engine version remained in Japan and was never localized anyplace else. When the arcade game Strider was released in 1989, it was one of those action titles that instantly grabbed your attention thanks to its incredible visuals and sound. It spun the tale of a future under the iron grip of a merciless dictator. As the best assassin the world has ever seen, Hiryu has the almost impossible mission of killing this bad guy to free all of mankind. The PC Engine edition started life as a conversion for the ill-fated Supergraphics console. It lingered in development hell for a while before being moved over to an arcade CD-ROM release. During that time, it gained some new cinematics and an extra stage, leading to what I'd call an okay conversion. There isn't anything inherently broken with what's here, it's just that for a 1994 release and all that waiting involved, you'd think NEC Avenue would have given us something outright spectacular. Instead, it's pretty much by the numbers, with numerous concessions. The arcade stages are here with a lot less detail in the backgrounds, and there's a bunch of sprite flicker, and a fair number of the colors appear really dark and subdued. With an already stellar X68000 port and a more than acceptable Genesis adaptation, this should have turned out so much better, especially considering all that RAM that the arcade card provided. It's not terrible by any means, but my expectations definitely weren't met with the final product. It also stayed in Japan and never came west. Cotton was always a great series to me. The original arcade version was ported to a number of platforms, including the PC Engine Super CD-ROM in 1993. Hudson Soft handled the game and the results are nothing short of impressive. Not only does it do an admirable job recreating the visuals of the far more powerful Sega System 16 edition, but it also comes with a remixed soundtrack that brings it up to another level. No kidding here, this is one of the best and most powerful shoot-'em-up soundtracks you're going to hear on this platform. The kind of thing that is so good, it elevates the experience and impacts the fun factor directly. It also has a well-told story, a tale about a witch named Cotton looking for candy while trying to restore light to her world. The art style is great, the gameplay fun, and the challenge high but not impossible. It's another top-tier conversion that proved this hardware had the oomph for anything that was thrown at it. Our final game in this lineup is the Capcom classic called Forgotten Worlds. This showed up in the arcade running on the CPS hardware in 1988, the same board that powered the likes of Final Fight and Strider. I saved this one because I was blown away by it the first time I played it. The level of recreation of the original assets is insane for a game of that time. Aside from the parallax scrolling being removed from this home conversion, it looks nearly one-to-one in many aspects. There's still a lot on screen happening and the bosses are suitably massive. Sprite Flicker rears its ugly head here and there, but I can't complain otherwise. You're gonna want to use a 3-button pad with this one so you have easy access to rotate both directions. Otherwise, you'll be having to use run to achieve the same effect. It does lose the 2-player co-op but retains the unique weapons between the two arcade characters, something that was missing in the Genesis edition. This was released on the Super CD-ROM and handled by NEC Avenue and A-Wave, which must have had its A-team on call that day. They absolutely nailed the look and feel of the arcade while adding new music and new voice work. Some of you will lament the lost background depth, but I think overall this is a very impressive effort that captures Capcom's original work in fine style. Once again, we come to the end of an arcade versus the Turbografx 16 video, and all I have to say is wow, was this hardware so impressive. We often lost background layering in many of these conversions, and there was almost always some sprite flicker to discuss. But these games held up well on hardware that is often dismissed as the weakest of the 16-bit contenders. The thing is, we have only scratched the surface of the mini arcade ports that were available for the Turbo and PC Engine. We could do many more of these episodes if you have the interest. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I'll also throw a link to part 1 in the description for those of you that missed it. NEC's Little Engine That Could was a fascinating console, and if you've never given it a chance to impress you, it's never too late to change that. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.